After a long and tiresome journey of all night, about 7 a.m. Indians were seen on the hills to our front and left, who were evidently watching our movements. It was reported to General Crook by the scouts that we had gotten into a country that was completely alive with hostile Indians, and that we were near an immense Indian camp. General Crook at about 7:30 a.m. went into camp with the intention of making another night march, and if possible, overtake their camp the next day. As we had been in the saddle all night, men and horses needed a few hours' rest. After going into camp, we unsaddled and put our horses to graze, but first hobbling them to prevent any stampede that might be attempted. While we were putting our horses to graze, the whole range of hills in our front became literally alive with Indians, and at the same time, the Crow and Shoshone Indians with us commenced their warlike preparations by daubing themselves with war paint and riding their ponies in a circle one behind the other, and at the same time singing their war songs. After riding in this manner a short while, the circle broke, and the whole group of Indian scouts charged up the hill toward their enemies. It is a well-known fact that the Sioux and Crow Indians were enemies toward each other at that time. I have seen the Crow Indians shoot buffalo and let them lie where they fell, not even undertaking to remove the hide, because they would say, "Sioux buffalo no good," which indicated that as the Sioux Indians were their enemies, so were the buffalo found in the Sioux country their enemies also. Everything in the Sioux country was an enemy to the Crow Indian. While our Indians were making their charge upon the Sioux, General Crook gave orders to saddle up, for well he knew that a battle was on hand. After we had saddled and formed in line, my troop, F 3rd Cavalry, was placed on the left flank of the command, and it with 2 other troops were detailed as skirmishers and were ordered to make a flank movement to our left and gain the hills, where we dismounted, leaving each 4th trooper to hold the horses. We then formed the skirmish line on foot, which was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Royal. At this time, I witnessed a most daring act by a bugler by the name of Snow, who was carrying a dispatch from General Crook to Colonel Royal. General Crook was stationed on one of the hills to our right, near the center of the line, where he could view all that was taking place. Wishing to send an order to Colonel Royal, he directed his orderly bugler Snow to carry it with all haste. The most direct route was down a steep hill and across a level plain, and then up another hill, where Colonel Royal was. All chances of reaching there alive were against him. When I saw him, he was coming as fast as his horse could carry him, while 2 Indians were after him with the intention of capturing him. Seeing that they could not capture him, they finished the game by shooting at him, and proved their good marksmanship as poor Snow fell from his horse, shot through both arms, but he delivered his orders all right. After remaining on the skirmish line for perhaps 2 hours, we were ordered to fall back and remount our horses to take a new position. Our horses were held in check in a ravine, as it was impossible to hold our present position against such overwhelming odds. I must say that I never saw so great a body of Indians in one place as I saw at that time, and I have seen a great many Indians in my time. It seemed that if one Indian was shot, 5 were there to take his place. If we had remained in our first position, we would all have been killed, and I consider that we retreated at the right time. I had not gone more than 1/3 of the distance from our position to where the horses were when I overtook 3 other soldiers of my own troop, carrying a sergeant by the name of Marshall, who had been shot through the face. I knew that time was precious and none to lose. I could not give them the cold shoulder by passing them without giving a helping hand. Glancing back, I saw the hostiles coming over the hill. I said to the others, "Quick, here they come." At that instant, my comrades, to save themselves, dropped the wounded sergeant and hastened to their horses. The sergeant, seeing that I was the only one left, said, "Save yourself if you can, because I am dying. Don't stay with me." I replied, "Dave, old boy, I am going to stay right here with you and will not desert you." Grasping him with all my strength, I carried my comrade until it was useless to carry him any farther, for he was dead. I then laid him down and left him and hurried to get away. I don't think that I had gone more than 10 yards when I was surrounded by about 20 or more of the most murderous-looking Indians I ever saw. You can talk of seeing devils. Here they were in full form, painted in the most terrifying manner, some with their war bonnets adorned with horns of steers and buffalo. It was enough to strike terror to anyone's heart. I knew that my time had come. I knew that I would be taken prisoner. I fought, but it was fighting against terrible odds. There I was down in that ravine, alone, and in the midst of a lot of murderous savages, taking my carbine from me and throwing a lariat over my head and tightening it about my feet. I was helpless. This was all done in an instant, while I struggled and fought in vain, until I was struck on the head with something which rendered me unconscious and caused me to fall. As I went down, a bullet struck me in the body. I think that when the bullet struck me, I regained my consciousness, because I realized I was being dragged at a lively pace over the ground by a pony at the other end of the lariat. It was, I think, the intention of the Indians either to drag me to death at the heels of the pony, or after getting me away to torture me in some other manner. They captured one other comrade of mine by the name of Bennett, of L Troop, 3rd Cavalry, and completely cut him in pieces. His remains were buried in a grain sack. After I was dragged in this manner for some distance, my captors were charged by one of the troops of cavalry, and to save themselves from capture abandoned me and made their escape. Thus was I enabled to regain my liberty. I was immediately sent to the field hospital, and 3 days later I, with 18 other wounded men, was sent to the post hospital at Fort Fetterman. Trooper Phineas Towne. Here we have 3 black powder Winchester and Colt rifles from the 1880s and 90s. The top rifle was made in 1892 and is a Colt pump action or slide action rifle called the Lightning. The Colt Lightning rifle was manufactured for 20 years from 1884. The pump action proved to be very fast to operate. With this rifle, a man could hold the rifle against his shoulder, aim and hold the trigger down while pumping the action, thus shooting as fast as he could pump. The rifle holds 15 cartridges in its tube magazine under the barrel. The gun, while basically a good design, suffered from minor engineering issues which affected its reliability. The one above was acquired many years ago, and it has always functioned flawlessly for me, but if I ever had to choose between this and the Winchester to take to a 1890s gunfight, I would take the Winchester. The Colt came in 3 frame sizes, the small frame for the .22 caliber, the medium frame for the .32-20, .38-40, and the popular .44-40 calibers, and the large or express frame for the .38-56, .40-60, and the .50-90 calibers. The other 2 rifles are of course the gun that won the West, the Winchester Model 1873 lever action. The top one was manufactured in 1891, and the barrel length of 24 inches makes this one a sporting model. Most Winchester 1873 rifles are this length. The bottom rifle is called the short rifle due to its 20-inch barrel. Other common lengths were the trapper 16-inch, the carbine 19-inch, and the musket with a 30-inch barrel. Winchester customers could customize their rifles and order fancy engraving, gold inlay, fancy stocks with exotic timber, and with any length barrel. The ones pictured here have none of those features, but the 1885 short rifle has one special feature: a heavy barrel. The heavy barrel aids the continual accuracy of the rifle. Shooters don't care if a gun doesn't shoot where you aim it. They care if the bullets consistently have the same point of impact. If a rifle shoots consistently into the same spot, but not on target, then it is a simple task to tap the front sight left or right to move the aim horizontally and use the rear sight for elevation. If, on the other hand, while shooting at a bullseye, the bullets go everywhere, then usually the rifling in the barrel is worn. Collectors don't really care about worn barrels and would prefer an old rifle with a worn original barrel to an old rifle with a new barrel that shoots straight. The 3 rifles here are all chambered in the .44-40 caliber. That is, the caliber is .44 with 40 grains of black powder in the cartridge. When the Winchester 1873 came out the same year as the Colt single-action army revolver, it gave a man on the frontier the firepower of 20 men just 20 years before. The combination of the guns gave a man 21 bullets available to shoot before he needed to reload. In 2014, an old 1873 model Winchester was found propped against a juniper tree in the Great Basin National Park, Nevada. The old gun had been manufactured in 1882, and judging by its condition, it had been sitting out there for a very long time. Perhaps why it evaded detection for so long was because nature had camouflaged its exterior. The barrel and action had developed an earthy brown rust over their surfaces, and along with its old gray weathered buttstock, it resembled the juniper tree it rested against. The ammunition found in the rifle was manufactured sometime between 1887 and 1911. One can only imagine the circumstances that led to this essential tool of survival being left against the juniper tree all those years ago. The public is very lucky it was found by park rangers as they searched the area for artifacts before a fire hazard reduction burn. I think if I had found it, I wouldn't let this amazing treasure out of my sight, and if you wanted it, you would need to pry it from my cold, dead
hands.
In the late 1890s, Bill Smith and his 3 brothers, George, Al, and Floyd, had been getting a lot of unwanted attention from the law in New Mexico, so they crossed the border into Arizona and settled near the town of St. John's. The boys just couldn't keep out of trouble, and in 1898, Bill Smith found himself in jail, charged with horse rustling. Months after Bill's arrest, his brother Al smuggled in a revolver, and the outlaw pulled it on his jailer and made his escape. Bill, his 3 brothers, a brother-in-law, and 2 other desperados were now on the run committing crime across eastern Arizona. The outlaws were elusive, but one day a male driver who had just arrived in St. John's stated he had seen a number of men butchering a steer on the road to Springerville. Sheriff Ed Beeler got together a posse and rode out to the location to see if it was the fugitives. As the posse arrived at the scene, they were met with a hail of bullets. The battle lasted half an hour before the outlaws could get away. Neither party had been wounded. The next morning, a second posse was organized by rancher Dick Gibbons. Gibbons divided his men into 2 groups. He headed one of them and told the second group to stay on the rustlers' trail and drive them into his men who were racing ahead and around the outlaws. The second group, consisting of Dick's nephew, Gus Gibbons, 24, Frank LeSueur, 21, and Antonio Armijo and Frank Ruiz, planned to stay on the rustlers' trail and drive them into the ambush. The outlaws and the 4 young men didn't show up where they were expected. The next day, Dick Gibbons met Armijo and Ruiz on the trail. The 2 explained they had quit the hunt the night before, leaving the younger Gibbons and LeSueur alone. Gibbons and his men rode on in search of the 2 men. He describes what he saw as he gained a crest.
It looked like the body of a man, but I would not admit it to myself. I was still too far away to be able to identify it. And while I was thinking about it, I saw another object that looked like a quilt had been thrown away by the outlaws and had been rolled up by the wind and lodged in the wash where it now lay. But as we drew nearer, I saw that it was the body of my nephew, Gus Gibbons. It was lying in the bottom of a little draw with head downhill and face upwards, with 3 ghastly bullet holes through the head. One of them had entered his mouth and had come out the back of his neck. One had gone in at the left ear and had come out below the mouth, breaking the lower jaw and disfiguring the face awfully. We well knew what the other object was that we had noticed lying on the hillside. The sight was horrifying to the senses. To see the 2 boys lying there, boys I had known since they were in the cradle and had watched them grow up. They were just in the pink of manhood, and for them to be ambushed and shot down like dogs, without even a chance to fight for their lives, made me sick. It was murder in its worst form, and there is not another crime beneath the roof of heaven that can stain the soul of man with a more infernal hue than an assassination such as this.
The outlaws were on the run again until October 8th, when another posse came upon the outlaws near the Black River on the border of the Fort Apache Reservation. A newspaper reported, 2 more innocent men fall at the hands of those fiendish, brutal beings called outlaws. The report came in that a posse following 6 outlaws ran onto them at sundown last Tuesday night, where a hot battle took place, and the report claims Will Maxwell was with the pursuing party, was shot through the head and killed. Carlos Tafoya was shot through the right side below the ribs, perhaps fatal. Owing to the darkness coming on, the posse was unable to go nearer the outlaw's position. But it was supposed that 1 outlaw was killed and 1 wounded. The posse afterward gained possession of the outlaw's horses. Mr. E.T. Holgate, a member of the posse who met the Smith gang on the evening of the 8th, returned home yesterday. Mr. Holgate says he was in the fight and was near the side of Mr. Tafoya when he was shot. Tafoya is in a very serious condition. The hole in his side is so large that when he drinks, the water runs out through it. He was not expected to live over an hour or so when Mr. Holgate left. Mr. Maxwell had the top of his head shot off and instantly killed. He was also but a short distance from Mr. Holgate. They ran the outlaws from their camp, which was situated in a hole, and gained possession of their camp and horses, but he did not think any of the gang was hit. Just as we were ready to go to press, the lifeless body of Mr. Tafoya was brought into town. Late information from Black River, where a battle was fought last week between a party of citizens and the Smith gang of outlaws, is to the effect that there were 12 in the citizens' party on the trail of the outlaws. The citizens' party was divided up into 2 or 3 squads. Just at dusk on the evening of the 8th, the advance guard of the citizens' party came upon the outlaws in a little rincon of Black River, surrounded by trees and underbrush. The outlaws had just made camp and were starting a fire. They were not armed at the time, but as it afterward transpired, their Winchesters were leaning up against a tree. They were commanded by Mr. Maxwell to surrender, and they said, "All right," and asked how they should come out. Mr. Maxwell ordered them to come straight ahead, which happened to be in line with their Winchesters. When they reached the tree against which their rifles were leaning, they grabbed them and the battle commenced, in which Mr. Maxwell was killed, and the posse was so demoralized that the outlaws had little difficulty in escaping. About 11 o'clock that night, the outlaws visited Johnson's cattle camp, where a roundup was in progress, and wanted to buy horses, but were told that all of the horses with the outfit were in use. They bought 30 pounds of flour and some bacon and left for the hills, since which time nothing has been heard of them. Mr. Johnson did not know that they were outlaws, or that a battle had been fought until the following day. The gang disappeared into Mexico and is thought to have never set foot in Arizona again. Rumors abounded that Bill Smith, with brother Al, caught a steamer to Argentina. George Smith, the younger brother who had been shot in the battle, wandered the hills for weeks after the fight, badly wounded. He eventually recovered without any medical attention. In 1907, George walked into Morenci and gave himself up to authorities, with no charge against him being found on the books anywhere. He was released, and he went home to the family ranch on the Blue River. William Maxwell's hat, that had been shot off his head when he was killed in the encounter with the outlaws, lay bloody and torn in that spot for years, as superstitious men refused to touch it.